Cue low, haunting background music, the sound of a heartbeat fading into the quiet hum of an American suburb. It was supposed to be a dream year abroad. A young, bright-eyed British teenager named Louise Woodward boarded a plane to the United States in 1996, chasing the promise of adventure, independence, and a fresh start in a new country. She was just 18 years old, full of life, laughter, and dreams of seeing the world before university. Louise had joined an au pair program, a common way for young Europeans to work as live-in babysitters for American families. Her placement took her to a quiet, wealthy neighborhood in Newton, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. A picture-perfect town with leafy streets, large homes, and families who seemed to have everything. Her host family was the Eappens, Deborah and Sunil, both doctors highly respected in their fields, raising two beautiful children. Matthew, their 8-month-old baby boy, and Brendan, a cheerful toddler. To Louise, it felt like she had walked into a dream. A cozy American family, a comfortable home, and a chance to earn money while exploring the U.S. But what she didn't know was that within just a few short months, her name would become synonymous with one of the most controversial murder cases in modern history. Mantelpiece clock the days before. At first, everything seemed fine. Louise was playful and energetic. She often took the children on walks, sang nursery rhymes, and helped around the house. But according to people who later testified, cracks began to show. Friends noticed Louise often complained about the long hours and strict expectations. She wasn't just watching the kids, she was cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, and sometimes even working late into the night while the parents were on call at the hospital. Neighbors said she seemed stressed, overwhelmed, and exhausted. Then there were the Eappens. They were polite but meticulous, especially Deborah, the mother. Some described her as controlling, others as protective. She wanted her children raised with care and discipline, and she reportedly scolded Louise when she felt the young nanny wasn't careful enough. Still, there were no major fights. No visible tension. Just an undercurrent of quiet pressure, the kind that builds slowly until it snaps. Candle February 4, 1997, the day everything changed. It was a cold Tuesday morning when it happened. Sunlight crept through the curtains of the Eappen home as Louise began her usual babysitting duties. She had already been with the family for several months. The baby Matthew had been fussy that week, crying more than usual, restless and teething. According to Louise, that morning started like any other. She fed Matthew, played with him, and laid him down for a nap. But around 3 p.m. something went horribly wrong. Louise later said that when she went to pick Matthew up, he was unresponsive, limp, pale, and not breathing. Panic flooded her mind. She tried to shake him gently, then harder, desperate to wake him up. At 3:13 p.m. she called 911. Her voice, captured on the emergency call, was trembling but controlled. "The baby's not breathing. Please hurry." When paramedics arrived, they found Matthew unconscious with severe head injuries. He was rushed to Children's Hospital in Boston, where doctors discovered devastating brain damage, a fractured skull, and internal bleeding, injuries consistent with violent shaking or impact trauma. Balance scale the accusation. By the next morning, police were knocking at Louise's door. Detectives questioned her for hours. They said her story didn't add up, that her calm tone on the 911 call didn't match the violent nature of the baby's injuries. The medical examiner said Matthew's wounds couldn't have been from a simple fall or gentle shake. After nearly 5 hours of interrogation, Louise said something that changed everything. "I did shake him. I was trying to get him to breathe. I dropped him a little bit on the bed, but not hard." The detectives exchanged looks. To them it was a confession. To Louise it was a misunderstanding, a desperate attempt to explain what happened in panic, not a statement of guilt. But within hours she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The story exploded across the media. Headlines screamed, "British nanny murders baby in Boston." The image of a smiling young woman from a small English town suddenly became the face of a supposed monster. Woman detective the evidence. The prosecution's case was chilling. They argued that Louise, angry and frustrated after months of feeling overworked, lost control. In a burst of rage, they said she violently shook baby Matthew, then slammed his head against a hard surface, causing catastrophic brain injuries. They pointed to the subdural hematoma, retinal hemorrhaging, and skull fracture. All signs, they said, of shaken baby syndrome. The timeline matched, the injuries matched, and the motive, emotional exhaustion, made sense. But the defense told a different story. They argued that Matthew's injuries could have come from an older incident, perhaps a small fall days or weeks earlier. They said Louise's confession was a frightened teenager's poor wording under extreme pressure. To them, she wasn't a killer, she was a victim of misunderstanding and medical uncertainty. Drop of blood, a nation divided. The case divided two countries. In the U.S., many saw Louise as cold, guilty, and careless. Someone who couldn't handle responsibility and took out her anger on a helpless child. In Britain, she was seen as the opposite. A naive young girl thrown into a foreign system, manipulated by police, and condemned by the media before the trial even began. British newspapers called her the Boston nanny, portraying her as innocent and mistreated. Meanwhile, American headlines demanded justice for baby Matthew. It became more than a trial, it was a cultural war, a clash of empathy and outrage. Fire inside the courtroom. When the trial began in October 1997, every seat in the courtroom was filled. TV cameras weren't allowed, but the public followed every word through daily reports and sketches. Louise sat quietly, dressed modestly, often looking down. She was only 19 by then, small, pale, visibly nervous. The prosecution showed graphic medical photos and emotional testimony from doctors and police. They said it was clear. No one else could have caused those injuries. The defense brought in expert witnesses who challenged the shaken baby theory. One doctor said Matthew's injuries were days old, not hours, meaning they could have happened before February 4th. Another pointed out that modern science was beginning to question whether shaking alone could cause such damage. It became a battle of experts, each contradicting the other, each planting seeds of doubt or certainty in the jury's minds. And through it all, Louise cried, quietly, sometimes uncontrollably. But the question remained. Was she crying out of guilt, or pure fear? Hourglass not done verdict. On October 30, 1997, after 26 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom fell silent. Louise stood, trembling, as the foreman read the words that would change her life forever. We find the defendant, Louise Woodward, guilty of second-degree murder. She gasped. Her parents sobbed in the gallery. The sentence: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Outside, protesters screamed on both sides. Some yelled, "Murderer," while others held signs saying, "Free Louise." But just when it seemed the story was over, it wasn't. Because 2 weeks later, the judge did something extraordinary. He reviewed the evidence again and reduced her conviction from second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter. His reason? He said there wasn't enough proof of intent. Louise's sentence was changed to time served, just 279 days, meaning she was free to go. The courtroom erupted in chaos. The Eappens were devastated. The British public celebrated. And the world stood divided, wondering, did justice win, or did it fail? Cue dark fade out. Soft music rises. The screen goes black. Soft eerie piano fades in. The camera pans across gray Boston skies. A news anchor's voice echoes faintly in the background. Breaking news. Judge Hiller Zobel has just reduced Louise Woodward's conviction to involuntary manslaughter. The 19-year-old British au pair will be released immediately. The date was November 10, 1997, but to many it felt unreal. In a matter of seconds, Louise Woodward, once branded a murderer, was now a free woman. She had spent just 279 days in jail, yet in that short time she'd become one of the most infamous names in both American and British legal history. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered. Some wept. Some screamed. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps as flashing cameras filled the cold Boston air. And there she was, a pale young woman in a dark coat, escorted by police, walking through a storm of noise, tears, and anger. Fogged the judge's gamble. Judge Zobel's decision was unlike anything the public had seen before. He said that while the jury had found her guilty, he could not, in good conscience, let a verdict stand that he personally believed didn't match the evidence. He ruled that there was no proof of malice, that Louise's actions may have been reckless, but not intentionally murderous. In his written statement, he said, "I am morally certain that allowing this conviction to stand would be unjust. To some, he was a hero, a man who corrected a flawed verdict. To others, he was a coward, a judge who had let a baby's killer go free." The Eappens, heartbroken beyond words, released a public statement. "We cannot understand how our baby's life means so little. The system has failed Matthew." Television, the media storm. The story didn't end with her release, it only grew louder. TV crews followed Louise from the moment she stepped outside. Every headline screamed some version of the same question. Was justice served? In the United States, talk shows and news panels debated endlessly. Some called her a cold-blooded killer, others called her a victim of hysteria. In Britain it was the opposite. Crowds in her hometown of Elton, Cheshire, celebrated her release with banners reading, "Welcome home, Louise." To them, she was their daughter, a small-town girl who had been chewed up and spat out by a foreign justice system. But deep down, even her supporters felt something unsettled. Something dark hung over the story. Because one question remained: what really happened that day? Kendall homecoming. When Louise returned home to England, her arrival was both triumphant and haunted. Cameras followed her from the airport to her family's small brick home. Neighbors clapped. Reporters shouted questions. "Louise, did you kill the baby? Do you feel guilty? What are your plans now?" She said nothing. Her parents shielded her, guiding her inside as flashbulbs burned through the fog. For weeks she refused interviews. When she finally spoke, her words were quiet but powerful. "I did not hurt Matthew. I never did anything to harm that child. I only ever cared for him." But her voice trembled when she said it, not from guilt but from exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't fade with sleep. She was 19 years old, and the world already saw her as either a murderer or a martyr. Mantelpiece clock. Life after freedom. Louise tried to rebuild her life. She enrolled at South Bank University in London to study law, perhaps to understand the system that had nearly destroyed her. But peace didn't come easy. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. People stared. Job offers vanished when her name was recognized. She tried to dance again. She had always loved dancing, and even joined a salsa group for a while. But reporters found her there too. No matter how much time passed, the shadow of that February day in 1997 never left her.